The mountains keep their secrets, and the fjords whisper to those who listen. The Isdal Valley was known for its unforgiving beauty, where steep, rocky slopes met dark, ice-cold waters. The Norwegians called it Death Valley, a name earned from its treacherous terrain and the occasional misstep that sent climbers to their doom. But in November 1970, the valley became known for something darker, a mystery that would echo through the decades, whispering its secrets like the wind through the pines. On a cold morning, November 29th, two young girls were hiking with their father along one of the more isolated trails that snaked through the Isdal Valley. The frost crunched under their boots, and their breath came out in white puffs, mingling with the fog that hung low between the trees. They were used to the valley's harshness, to its silence and its shadows. But on that day, something felt different, an unease that seemed to seep out of the very rocks and roots. The girls walked ahead, laughing, kicking at the frozen ground, when one of them stumbled over something half buried in the snow. She looked down and saw what she thought was a pile of old clothes, scorched and blackened. But then she saw the hand, a pale, lifeless hand reaching out of the earth, fingers twisted as if grasping for help that never came. She screamed, and the sound seemed to hang in the cold air, swallowed by the fog. Their father hurried over, his face turning white as he saw what the girls had found. The body was charred beyond recognition, lying on its back, its arms stretched outward. The flesh was burned, peeling away like paper, but the face, what was left of it, was frozen in a silent scream. The body was partially covered with stones, arranged almost deliberately like some ancient ritualistic burial. Around her were objects that made no sense. A watch stopped at 12:32, a half-melted umbrella, and bottles of gasoline that still smelled acrid and sharp. The authorities arrived quickly, a grim procession of uniformed men moving with measured steps. They surveyed the scene, their breath fogging in the cold air, eyes narrowing at the burned remains, at the strangeness of it all. They noted the smell of burning flesh, mixed with the sharp tang of the forest, a scent that seemed to linger long after they left. They searched the area and found more clues: an empty sleeping pill bottle, 2 water bottles with German labels, and clothing with all the labels meticulously cut out. The strangeness of it all seeped into their bones like the cold. No one knew who she was. No one had seen her arrive in the valley, and no one had reported her missing. Her body, like the objects around it, seemed to be a puzzle without a solution, a riddle wrapped in smoke and shadows. The newspapers called her the Isdal Woman, but the name was all they had. She was a mystery, an enigma, a ghost in a place already thick with folklore and fear. The autopsy revealed little more. She was young, in her mid-30s, with dark hair and delicate features, though her face was hard to recognize due to the severe burns. The pathologist noted that she had died from a combination of burns and carbon monoxide poisoning. But there was more. A large number of sleeping pills in her stomach, at least 50 or more, enough to kill her twice over. Her fingerprints were sent to Interpol, but there were no matches, no records, no trace of who she was or where she had come from. She was a blank slate, a ghost with no past. But the investigators refused to give up. They searched further and found a suitcase in a train station locker in Bergen, the nearest town. Inside, they found a curious collection of items: clothing, a map with certain places marked, a prescription for lotion, and a pair of broken reading glasses. All of the labels had been meticulously removed. The mystery deepened. Who was this woman who had so carefully erased her own identity? What had she been doing in Norway, and why had she died alone in the cold grip of the Isdal Valley? In her suitcase, there was also a notebook filled with strange codes and sequences of letters and numbers, a cryptic script that made no sense to anyone who looked at it. Was it a cipher, a message, or just the ramblings of a woman on the brink of madness? The police tracked down shopkeepers, train conductors, hotel clerks, anyone who might have seen her. Some remembered her. A beautiful woman with striking eyes, who spoke several languages, French, German, English, though her accent was hard to place. She had registered under different names in various hotels, always with a slight smile, always polite, but always distant, as if she were hiding something. No one could agree on where she was from. She seemed to be from everywhere and nowhere all at once. Then there were the men in suits. Several witnesses claimed they saw her with them. Tall men with stern faces, always watching, always keeping their distance. Were they following her? Protecting her? Or were they somehow connected to her death? Some began to whisper of espionage, of Cold War secrets buried in the snow. Others spoke of darker things, curses, ghosts, old spirits that wandered the mountains. The valley had a way of swallowing people whole, they said, of taking what it wanted and leaving behind only shadows. The townspeople grew restless, their unease turning into fear, their whispers into warnings. Children were kept inside after dark, and the local bars filled with rumors, with theories that grew wilder with each telling. But the police continued their investigation. They consulted experts in cryptography, but no one could decipher the strange codes in her notebook. They followed every lead, but each one ended in a dead end, a door that led nowhere. The mystery seemed to deepen with every step, the fog growing thicker, the shadows longer. Then came the strange calls. Detective Arne Magnus, the lead investigator, began receiving calls late at night, calls filled with static and a low, distant hum. At first he thought it was just a faulty line, a coincidence, but then the whispers began. Low and indistinct at first, but growing louder with each call. A woman's voice, speaking in a language he did not understand, the words hurried, frantic, as if she were trying to warn him of something, to tell him a secret he could not grasp. The calls continued, always at the same time, just after midnight. Magnus tried to trace them, but they seemed to come from nowhere, from a place just beyond reach. He began to feel the weight of the investigation pressing on him, a sense of dread that settled over his shoulders like a shroud. He started to dream of the Isdal Woman, of her burned face staring at him from the shadows, her eyes wide and empty, her mouth moving but no sound coming out. One night, he awoke to find his room filled with the smell of smoke, a thick, acrid scent that made his eyes water and his throat burn. But there was no fire, no source for the smell, just the lingering odor of something that should not be there. He went to the window, opened it wide, and saw nothing but the dark outline of the mountains against the night sky and the cold, clear stars above. But he felt something watching him, something just beyond the edge of sight, something waiting in the shadows. The investigation dragged on, and Magnus began to feel as if he were chasing a ghost, a phantom that danced just out of reach. The more he looked, the less he understood. The pieces didn't fit, the clues led nowhere, and the whispers grew louder. He spoke to a psychic, a woman who claimed to have seen the Isdal Woman in a vision. She described her standing on the edge of a cliff, her face half in shadow, half in light. She was holding something in her hand, a small black object that seemed to pulse with a dark energy. "She is trapped," the psychic said, her voice trembling. "Trapped between worlds, between light and dark. She is looking for something, something she lost, or something she stole." Magnus dismissed it as nonsense, but the words stayed with him, echoing in his mind. He returned to the valley, to the place where her body had been found, hoping to find something he had missed. He stood there in the cold, the wind howling through the trees, the shadows deepening around him. He felt the presence then, a cold, dark weight pressing down on him, a sense that he was not alone. He turned, and for a moment he saw her. Standing in the distance, her figure half hidden in the mist, her face turned toward him. Her eyes were dark, unreadable, but her lips moved as if she were speaking, whispering something he could not hear. He blinked, and she was gone. But the feeling remained, the sense of something unfinished, something waiting. The Isdal Woman's case was officially closed, marked as an unexplained death. But for those who knew, for those who had felt the cold breath of the valley, the whispers never stopped. They spoke of a woman with no name, a woman with too many secrets, a woman who still wandered the mountains, searching for something that was lost. They say, if you listen closely on a cold winter's night, you can still hear her. The sound of footsteps crunching in the snow, the low hum of static on the wind, and a voice, soft and distant, calling out from the darkness, calling for answers that would never come. And in the stillness of the valley, in the shadows that creep across the rocks, you can feel her presence. A ghost without a grave, forever searching, forever lost, forever waiting.